anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The following is an excerpt from a piece written by the ethicist Michael Josephson entitled, "What Will Matter?" What will matter? How will the value of your days be measured? What will matter is not what you bought, but what you built. Not what you got, but what you gave. What will matter is not just your success, but your significance. What will matter is not what you learned, but what you taught. What will matter is every act of integrity, compassion, courage, or sacrifice that enriched, empowered, or encouraged others to emulate your example. What will matter is not your competence, but also your character. What will matter is not how many people you knew, but how many will feel a lasting loss when you are gone. What will matter is not your memories, but the memories that live in those you loved. What will matter is not how long you lived, but how long you will be remembered, by whom, and for what. The term inimitable is defined as the quality of being so good or unusual or unique as to be impossible to copy, matchless. And while it is true that every person is unique, there are but a precious few that merit the descriptor inimitable. As we move into this time of memory of and tribute to Ralph, it seems appropriate to apply this lens of inimitability as a frame. Ralph was born on July 15, 1933, to his parents at Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago, with his brother Michael coming along just under a year later, Irish twins, as it were. Ralph deeply admired his father in so many ways and would recount his life in superhero terms. When Ralph shared with Irving that his shop class in junior high was undersupplied and poorly supervised, Irving came to the class only to find the teacher playing cards in the back, with boxes and boxes of brand new tools clearly being repurposed for non-classroom-based activities. Ralph described his father, and family, you'll tell me if I do this justice, gripping the teacher's neck with his hand, lifting him into the air, and declaring that things would be made right or else. And he'd be there to check on a weekly basis that justice was being served. Sadly, Irving died while Ralph was just a young teen. This resulted in him being raised by his mother, Esther, his grandmother, Sarah, perhaps his greatest influence, along with a slew of other female figures in his life, about whom we'll hear more in just a few moments. What Ralph saw and admired most in people, rooted in particular in how he admired his father and his grandmother, was expertise, inimitability. His approach to the potential of others possessing the qualities of excellence knew no gender, race, religion, what have you. Decades ahead of his time in whatever the endeavor was, Ralph simply was interested in whomever the best person was, period. Speaking of the best person, from the very beginning, Ralph knew Dolores was truly exceptional. And while it took some persistence, Paula will share more about that shortly too, ultimately Dolores got on board. The two were rooted in the same value systems, and Dolores was able to be the missing piece in Ralph's life. She was truly his fitting partner. The two navigated life together, built an incredible family and business together. They were married for 68 years. Ralph was not the most emotive father. He wanted Paula and Joel to be strong, hardworking, and excellent. And he empowered each of them to stand on their own, supporting them in their endeavors, having their backs. But if they wanted something to happen in their lives, well, that was up to them to make it happen. He wasn't going to intervene. Both Paula and Joel have been influenced profoundly by their father in their adult lives, from Paula working alongside Ralph in the business, to Joel eating with his dad at least 4 times every week for longer than he can remember. Paula and Joel both knew Ralph so deeply for the fullness of who he was, not just as a dad, but as a person. These relationships, inimitable. And Ralph so deeply respected Nancy and Gary, seeing them for the truly exceptional people and partners they were to his children. And as a grandfather, or pa, Ralph was equally unique, building profound connections with his grandchildren through empowerment too. Ralph wanted Adam, Sam, Ellery, and Lindsay to learn. He didn't tell them what to do. He wanted them to discover things for themselves, albeit with safety in mind first. Ralph was so fond of Allie and Dana, and he was so blessed to see and know the 4th generation of his family in his great-grandson, Jack. When I asked the family what they thought Ralph would say about them, they all immediately agreed he would declare, "Didn't I create an amazing family?" Ralph was a person who was truly consistent. He lived his values, he walked his talk. He believed in the importance of discipline, and he was disciplined. He valued education and was not just educated himself, but he was a teacher. And he helped as many people as he could become educated, sending many to college who otherwise would have never gone otherwise. He believed in the nobility of teaching. He believed in the potential of people regardless of pedigree, and he hired and elevated people accordingly. He believed in the value of contributing to society, and he undoubtedly left this world a better, safer place for everyone, for his being in it. He was inimitable. On the occasion of Ralph receiving his doctorate, just short of the completion of his 9th decade of life, his son Joel offered introductory remarks. I'd like to close with an excerpt of Joel's speech titled, "To Living Life with Focus." With indefatigable energy, Ralph studied, researched, and published, for this was his passion. He had a calling, and he hated the notion of wasting a single minute for what took him away from his next contribution to his chosen field. For Ralph, the value of your life, the happiness you will enjoy, that will be measured by the contribution that you make to your professions. With at least 164 published works, almost 300 seminars, and being referenced by the world's experts in their fields over 1,000 times, Ralph's body of work is far more than doing what he loves. It's a dedication to the pursuit of excellence, a love affair with the grind, a single-mindedness to do what others cannot. The real gift my dad has given us is a decision to live a life that is not ordinary. Let's honor him, not by just looking at his achievements, but by looking inward and demanding more of ourselves. He concluded at the time with these words in the present tense, and I'll invite them to understand still in the present tense. To my dad, for spending every day in pursuit of the exceptional, congratulations on choosing to live a life that's extraordinary. May this not be the last time we honor your pursuits. May his memory abide only as blessing. Paula. With Adam and Ellery.
Did you see he tripped me?
Okay, you don't need
I
this.
had this dream yesterday that my dad was going to trip me because I did not put in my speech that he was the world's foremost authority on slipping and falling and tripping. Ooh. This is Adam. This is Ellery. They're here to tap in if I can't get through this speech. And also, because I'm going to talk a lot about my dad's work, and we all worked for my dad at one point or another. And for those of you who worked for him, know, and that if you never worked for my dad, you only half knew my dad, because he was so much a part of this work. So let me get on to my real speech here. My dad was both a structural and a mechanical engineer, and he believed that engineers were partners with God. God created the raw materials and the laws of the universe, and the engineer's job was to create buildings and products for the benefit of humankind. He did not, however, believe that engineers should decide what those products should be. Those were the jurisdiction of the humanities, and it frustrated him that his undergrads weren't required to study them more deeply. History, law, religion, philosophy, literature, and art shape and reflect the value system of a culture and should dictate the products that engineers should and should not make. Engineers as servants, not masters. This elevated language may sound grandiose, but there was nothing pretentious about it. My dad's mind was just grand. He had an expansive worldview and a moral code which demanded that every human use their gift to make the world better. He loved anyone who was great at their job, no matter what the job. The best machinist, the best doorman, the best yoga teacher, who's obviously Rick, the best maintenance man, or cable installer, interested him far more than the men he thought successful but mediocre. If you came to repair something in the house, you might wind up there for hours, answering questions, touring his workshop. This appreciation for expertise came from his admiration of the craftsmanship of his father, who could fix anything, and his father's employees at the small gas station and body shops that he owned. My father drew wisdom and inspiration from art, film, and poetry. Most of you, and most of Chicago, have seen my parents' beautiful art collection. And during the days of VHS tape, you may have visited his garage and seen every movie ever made, recorded 3 on a tape. But the poetry may surprise you. Yet his poetry preferences revealed the most about him. His favorite poem was If by Rudyard Kipling, It's a poem wherein a father tells his son how to be a man. No surprise that that would interest my dad, but the end of the poem provides the key to understanding my dad. Quote, "If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and all that's in it." The unforgiving minute was the driver of my dad's life, and he was determined to fill every minute with a full 60 seconds of creative work. I think his obsession with the unforgiving minute came from the fact that his father died when my dad was just 14, after having already lost 2 years with him when he was on a secret mission for the war. Don't get excited, he was not a spy, but he was an industrial plumber who worked for Standard Oil and built the infrastructure for the Manhattan Project. My dad's father died when he was 49. My dad's grandfather died when he was 49. My dad's younger brother, Michael, died when he was 46. My dad's first cousin, David, died when he was 48. The unforgiving minute was very much a constant companion for my dad. Oh, and by the way, this is not in my speech, but it is for my brother as well, my brother who thinks he's nothing like my father. Just he battles the Barnett genes in his way by exercising constantly and eating in a restricted manner. My dad filled it with work. I'll show you 3 things. This is how my dad filled the unforgiving minutes for 89 years. I know this is a big room and some of you are sitting far away, but everybody who knows him knows what these 3 things are, because these are the 3 things he was most proud of in the world. His CV, this Triodine pamphlet of his workshop, and his PhD dissertation. His CV is 51 pages long. Most of its length encompasses his last 2 jobs: professor of mechanical and aerospace engineering at Illinois Institute of Technology for 50 years, and founding partner and chief scientist of Triodine for another 53 years. At Triodine, he investigated and served as an expert witness. His CV lists 400 published papers, including 5 engineering textbooks, 36 patents, 1 is still pending, 300 speeches, including ones in law schools and sociology departments, because he definitely walked the walk, not just engineering talks. And he prizes for best papers in civil engineering and mechanical engineering. Next, the workshop. My dad collected tools from the time he was 7 and ended his collection with a 3,000 square foot workshop filled with thousands of woodworking tools, plus a 2-car garage full of metalworking tools. This is a 19-page love letter to his workshop. There are no people in this brochure whatsoever. The brochure is the closest the grandchildren ever got to making the things I'm most proud of cut. Because each of them spent many a post-Shabbat dinner working with my dad on the projects of their choice in the shop. He would help them make anything they wished as long as they drew a plan first. Crayon drawings were fine. No matter how ridiculous what they wanted to make was, he never judged it. If they had a plan, he'd help them execute it, teaching them how to select and safely use all the tools in the process. The last of the things he was most proud of is his PhD thesis. My dad got his PhD in July of 2021 when he was 87 years old. How is it that he was a tenured full professor without a PhD? Well, in 1969, when he was offered his full professorship, he was 36 years old and still going to school. He had just finished his PhD coursework, but hadn't written his thesis. When he accepted the professorship, he had to give up on the PhD, because in academia, you're not allowed to get a degree from a school that you're working at. 52 years later, as an emeritus professor, not an active one, he was allowed to finally write his thesis. He was so proud of it that I'm sure just about everyone in this room has a copy of it. If the unforgiving minute is the one major through line in my dad's story, the other is remarkable women. My father was raised by women. His mother, his grandmother, occasionally his aunt, his grandmother's health companion, and a series of maids. These women were formidable and well ahead of their time. My dad's mother, Esther, managed a children's clothing store. She was a thoroughly modern career woman, even before her husband died. She worked full-time, went on buying trips, dressed like Chanel, could drink with any man, run a store, raise 2 boys, and entertain like a Rockefeller, with formal dinners every night on the salaries of a retailer and a plumber. His mother was his disciplinarian, and boy did he need one, because he was quite the juvenile offender. Huge brain, excess capacity, lax supervision, oratorial power, leadership confidence, a tag-along little brother, and access to tools was a recipe for quite the little demon. My dad said his mother came home from work every hour to give him a spanking. And she'd say, "I don't know what this is for, but you do." And he said, "I never got a spanking I didn't deserve." My dad's grandmother, Sarah, escaped from Russia on foot, emigrated to the United States, and took over her husband's insurance business, running it from her wheelchair well into her 90s. He revered Grandma Sarah and credited her for his values: hard work, fiscal responsibility, and family for better or worse. She made him get a paper route when he was 7, and at 8 she sold him his first insurance policy. That policy wound up paying for my mom's engagement ring. Grandma Sarah was the matriarch of both sides of his family. She knew and kept in touch with every living member of the family tree. Does this sound like another woman in his life that we all know? Grandma Sarah's health aide, Ella, moved in one day and never left. Her job was to feed the boy, and that was no easy feat. He was skinny and hyper and ate 5 sandwiches as a normal meal. My dad's appetite never changed. Unfortunately, his metabolism did. He was 6 feet tall and 135 pounds when he married my mom. He gained 60 pounds the first year. And he gained at least another 60 pounds after that. The maids, we still had never figured out how they could afford maids, but the maids taught him to expand his culinary choices. To set a perfect table, you have to have spoons, whether you need them or not. And to dance. This would become key to him meeting my mom. They met at a temple dance, introduced by my dad's lifelong friend, Stanley Schwartz, who also knew that my mom was a great dancer. So he noticed my mom was a great dancer, and when he took her out to eat, she ate more than him, and he was smitten. So he stalked her. He called her every night and left the phone off the hook so no other guys could call. When she'd go out on a date with another guy, he'd spend the evening in her apartment with her parents. He saw her as smarter, prettier, more capable, and more successful than she ever saw herself. She saw herself as a super secretary who dropped out of college with a great personality and fashion sense. He saw her as a CFO, human resource director, public relations manager. Or maybe he just knew that she made him better. Her genius level EQ with his IQ, the winning combo. He always used to say, "Watch her, she can charm a snake." As you all well know, my mom was his greatest partner. When my dad was offered a full professorship, he was only a year into his first good-paying private sector job as director of R&D. He would have to take a 50% pay cut, and we were in danger of losing our house. My mom said, "Take the job. This is what you've been working toward, what I've been paying for. Don't worry, I know you'll be successful." Sure enough, a year later, Ford Motor Company called the school looking for an expert witness. The dean said, "Barnett seems to be in court all the time. Why don't you call, Barnett seems to be in court all the time, why don't you call him?" Of course, the reason he was in court all the time was because he was suing our next door neighbor for 10 years, but the dean didn't know that. And so my dad's career was off to the races. Before it was Triadine, Ralph's new consulting practice ran out of our house, and my mom was the de facto partner, which meant every night she'd come home from her real job in the city and stay up all night typing the work my dad needed for the next day. She also paid the bills, scheduled the travel, took care of the accounting, took care of the organization. 2 additions to our house later, there were 6 engineers, a model maker, a graphic artist working in our basement, all with 24-hour access to our house. After many years of this, my mom threatened my dad, and said, "Join Carl Lusgiris as a partner, move into a real office, and hire a secretary." She continued to work as CFO for another 30 years. How did my dad balance his full-time teaching job with his full-time national product liability practice? It's helpful to look at a typical day. He'd get to the airport at 6:30, board a plane, tell the flight attendant not to wake him for any reason, unless he had to open the emergency exit and help people down the slide, which actually did happen to him once. Then he'd fly, so he was at O'Hare on the plane, asleep. He'd fly to an airport, be driven to the site of the next accident, he'd be driven to the site of the accident asleep, see a machine that dismembered someone, take pictures and measurements, talk to whoever was allowed to talk to him, get driven back to the airport asleep, fly back to Chicago, not sleeping, working, limo to IIT, teach a night class, go to Chinatown with some students for dinner, come home, read case files, do research, write papers, write opening statements and closing arguments, then go to sleep at 3 a.m. Those of you who know my nephew Sam may notice a similarity in work style. Life with Ralph outside of work wasn't much easier. It was hard to socialize with him because he didn't do small talk. Remember the unforgiving minute. And God forbid you ever talked about your retirement. Retirement was anathema to my dad. Your failure to fill the unforgiving minute to your full capacity. If you didn't want to talk about your work or something of great moment, he'd just take over and tell you about his latest cases and his current research passion. People who loved to listen loved my dad. All the others put up with him because they loved my mom. My mom makes 10 new friends a week, and she likes to fill the unforgiving minute with society. My dad, while capable of charm, did not always find socializing worth missing work. But he knew how important it was to my mom, so he did it, sometimes. Similarly, he didn't believe in vacations, because what could be more fun than work? So my mom would have to trick him by packing him for an overnight deposition, sending him to the airport, and then showing up at the airport herself with bags packed for travel. Once she told him he was going, though, he would click into travel mode, and travel became his job. He always had an interesting time, but you might not like the travel memories he came back with. After going to Rome, all he could talk about was how every historic site was covered in scaffolding. Paula, these ruins are all they have left of the civilization that gave the world its greatest art and architecture, and they can't even bother to finish the repairs. Nothing was more fun for my dad than working. He did not understand anyone wanting to do anything else, and he always wanted to share that joy of work with others who felt the same. He wanted the people around him to share in his success. He'd like to be able to hire his students and his colleagues like Jim Wingfield and Ted Lieber, who he had enjoyed working with in research jobs at the beginning of his career. And over the years, he helped many of his employees and friends start their own businesses. First within Triodine, and then spun off on their own. There was Alliance Tool and Manufacturing, Triodine Fire and Explosion, Triodine Environmental Engineering, Triodine Recreation Engineering, Triodine Wangler Construction, Triodine Safety Systems, and Alliance Building Maintenance. He even found a way to work with his childhood friend Larry Good, hiring him to process the hundreds of photos shot at Triodine every week. I wrote a lovely sentence in my dad's obituary about what a great storyteller he was. What I failed to say is that all of his stories ended with grievous bodily harm and paraplegia. Over 50 years, he investigated thousands of accidents, from huge industrial explosions to the most common consumer product failures or misuse. His stories were filled with human tragedy, stupidity, courtroom drama, and gore. Dismemberment, crush injuries, and worse were common dinner time conversation. And as my nephew Sam says, these came with no trigger warnings, and there was no consideration for the age of the listener. My dad needed a tremendous amount of tending to. He never made an appointment for himself. He never shopped for a piece of clothing. He never cooked a meal or packed a bag, arranged for the maintenance of the house or the car. He traveled every day and yet had no idea how to reserve a ticket or book a room. And you could be sure that if a flight was canceled or a hotel gave away his room, my mom, Chris Ann, and Barbara Balsam, our longtime travel agent, were all getting middle-of-the-night wake-up calls. Chris Ann is the Grandma Sarah of Triodine. the matriarch who knows and keeps track of the whole Triodine family tree. She's been his work wife and puppet master, and it's fitting and proper that she has received more expressions of condolence than all the rest of us combined. Notice once again the women. In a given day, it could take 8 women to get him out the door. Engineer Susie Glowiak would assemble the test results she and my dad had worked on a given case. Then graphics manager Mary Mizowitz would prepare all the non-photographics to communicate the essentials of the case to the lawyers or the jurors. Beth Hamilton, research librarian extraordinaire, would present supporting research scoured from specialty libraries all over the world. Jackie Schwartz, wife of lifelong friend Stanley, would make sure every word he wrote was proofed and edited and that nothing had been lost between his original and the draft he walked out the door with. Oh, got it. She would make sure that every word he wrote was proofed and edited, that nothing had been lost between his original, perfectly hand-lettered original draft and the typed printed final product. Chrisanne would speak to the attorneys, schedule his travel, and hand him his itinerary. Larry's wife, Esther, would drop off the case photos. Barbara would drop off the tickets. My mom would pack him, and away he'd go. 8 women to get him out the door. Being raised by extraordinary women made choosing extraordinary women to lead in his firm natural. It never occurred to him that some jobs were for women and some not. Though sometimes while I was mowing and weeding our lawn, I wish it had. Age played no part in his expectations either. Both of my kids and many of their friends had important jobs at Triodine. Ellery and Jamie Lasky were human test dummies. They would play with case artifacts while being filmed by the case engineer to see what kind of misuse manufacturers should have reasonably foreseen. And they also tested new designs to see if they would deter kids. Adam, whose mind and interests are most like my father's, started working cases with him while he was still in high school. Adam went on to accompany my dad on inspections, climbing, taking measurements, photos, conducting analysis, and helping to draft case reports. Together, they invented an oven door hinge that prevents ovens from tipping over onto children. My dad was not an easy person to be married to, but he was an easy person to have as a father, at least for me. My brother almost had a heart attack. If I wanted to spend time with him, all I had to say was, let's go to Sears. If I wanted to talk to him, I always knew where he was, in his office at his desk. He was always in his office at his desk. But he always kept the door open. He never said he was too busy if you walked in to talk to him. He listened to if you had something to say. He took your issues into serious consideration. He could tutor you on any subject. He would happily read any creative writing assignment you had. And the best thing is, he would agree with you that your teacher was wrong and you were right. In hindsight, that was probably the worst thing he could have done because it made me believe I was always right, just like he did. He was completely consistent. He didn't go to school plays, Little League, Pee Wee basketball, dance recitals, or tennis matches. He did one thing. He sat at his desk, and that's all I needed.
Lindsay. And Sam.
How do you do? That's how Pa would start every conversation when I called him. I'd proceed to tell him about my work and life, and he was always 100% engaged and proud. He'd throw in a Charlie Brown good grief at just the right times to make me smile in any conversation, and I know that he'd probably make me say good grief to describe the moment right now, and then proceed to laugh and do his typical cat ate the canary smirk. Pa was brilliant, and he exemplified what being a lifelong learner truly means. He got his PhD at 89 years old and never stopped working and using his mind. He always talked about the importance of making meaningful contributions to society, regardless of the field, and I'm so inspired by the way he lived and continued to learn and teach throughout his life. We shared our love of teaching, which was truly one of the most special parts of our relationship. Pa loved hearing about my second graders and said it was the perfect age for me to teach because I picked a class where I was at least as large as most of the students. My cousins and I learned so much from Pa, and we incorporate his teachings into our everyday lives. Many people know of Pa's academic accomplishments to the world, but in everything that Pa accomplished in his life, I'm most proud of the legacy he leaves with my dad. Sure, my dad never understood Pa's odd food combinations, like a delicious pizza with Velveeta cheese melted on top, or cottage cheese and sour cream together. And Pa never understood my dad's interest in the gym and working out for fun. But my dad learned to live his life with immense purpose and to excel in everything he does, at work, in parenting, and helping others. And I see how Pa's legacy carries on in my dad. Pa always supported and believed we could do anything. And when we needed him, he was always there. I can't imagine a world without him, but I'm so lucky to have had him in my life for 30 years. Pa, I love you so much, and I promise to make you proud every day. And as a family, we promise to carry on your incredible legacy. Thank you.
Get the little stand?
You'll be way too tall.
One of your... There are no words is a phrase I never heard my grandfather use. In fact, with Pa, the opposite was true. He always had a fascinating story, a poignant answer, a witty joke, and often those were one and the same. Growing up, we had Shabbat dinners at his house almost every Friday. After dinner, Adam, Ellery, Lindsay, and I would go down to Pa's incredible workshop to work on projects with him. But as Paula said, it was not a free-for-all. Before we could start working, we had to draw up plans, even if in crayons, and of course wear our safety goggles and closed-toed shoes. From a young age and throughout our lives, Pa instilled in us a love for learning and blurred the lines between work and play. When I left for Caltech, my time zone was 2 hours earlier. So by the time I was done with my studies, it was around midnight in California, 2 a.m. in Chicago. But Pa worked very late hours, and I always had a standing invitation to call him any time. So I did. About 3 times a week, for about an hour each call, and that continued for the last 15 years. Pa, I know you'd want math in your eulogy, so that works out to over 2,300 hours. And yet I feel that we still had so much more to discuss. He never was too busy for any topic, from scholarly discussions to funny personal stories, for serious advice to asking me to put an app on his phone. The only time he would need to put down his phone was to go to his self-described favorite destination, the washroom. Pa liked to quote influential thinkers, by the way, including himself. He often paraphrased Albert Einstein, saying, "Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler." My grandfather believed that you only truly mastered a topic if you could explain it to anyone. Pa valued brevity, at least in theory. In citing Pascal, "If I had more time, I'd write a shorter letter." Was brevity one of Pa's defining characteristics? To quote Pa, I can safely say no. None of us here would have ever thought that needing more words would have been an issue for Pa. Yet in one of our late night chats, this is exactly what Pa seemed to want. Specifically, he was complaining about his desk dictionaries and thesauri, and yes, Pa always used the correct plural form of words. "These reference books are just rotten," he complained. I asked him what books specifically. He said, "Well, let's start with the Oxford English Dictionary." And he proceeded to complain that it was missing important words and definitions. And I said, "There's an iPhone app that is a deluxe edition of the Oxford English Dictionary and Thesaurus." And he said, "Great, let's get it." And I looked up and I told him that it was $12.99. And unfazed, he said that he spent thousands of dollars on dictionaries, thesauri, textbooks, and other references. I clarified that it was $12.99, not $1,299, but that $12.99 for an app was outrageous. His response was direct and forceful. $12.99? And I explained that nearly all apps were free, with limited exceptions for 99-cent premium apps. $12.99? Do you want to try the free version first and see how it goes? $12.99? This went on for some time. I showed him a review that someone had said, "This is the most expensive app I've ever bought." He said, $12.99. Pa was undeterred. "Put it on my machine." Never wanting to revisit that conversation with Pa during his life. I never knew whether the extra words and definitions in this deluxe app were helpful to him. As the award-winning author of hundreds of publications, were there any words or phrases that Pa didn't know? It turns out the answer is yes. And with an endless supply of words to say about such a special person, so many memorable stories and perfect jokes, his remarkable wit and wisdom, it is actually simpler to view him through the lens of the handful of words and phrases that he never bothered to learn. Let's begin with one that Allie and I are working on teaching Pa's great-grandson: inside voice. I asked Pa if he was ever concerned about talking too loudly with people. He said, "I will speak at my volume, and people are free to sit as close or as far as they like." My grandma figured this out a long time ago. She conveniently loses her hearing aids. A few more unfamiliar phrases to Pa. "I'm not sure." "I've changed my mind." "Agree to disagree." "Maybe you're right." "I'm not hungry." "No butter on that, please." In 33 years, I never heard him say any of those phrases. I never heard him say anything was impossible. With dozens of patents covering an entire wall of his house, he inspired all of us to invent new solutions to make the world better. Another concept he never lived by: pick a lane. Business or pleasure, what's the difference? Academia or industry, both. Professor or student, yes. Speaker or listener, Pa relished each role. If Pa knew what a store-bought Valentine was, he never considered buying one for my Grandma Dolores. He would always make her the most thoughtful and personal gifts for Valentine's Day and anniversaries. Pa wanted to keep them as surprises, but my grandma would come up with very convincing excuses to go down to the workshop to try to see what he was making. I think I left my pen downstairs. Super convincing. One year, Pa made her a special wooden heart. The heart was covered in sandpaper, except just for a tiny part of smooth wood. And he wrote, "Every marriage has a rough patch." Another word that was not part of Pa's vocabulary was acquaintance. He cared deeply about everyone in his life. He was blessed with lifelong friends, friends from work, and friends from everywhere my grandma went. And he was incredibly generous and inclusive. He and my grandma hosted annual air show parties, Passover seders, and Thanksgiving dinners at their apartment. And my grandparents' friends are the most wonderful and diverse people in the world. And I'm so grateful that many of you are here today. Pa regarded you as his family too. On one occasion, they were hosting a dinner party at their home in Wilmette. To set the scene, their home has a 2-story bookshelf, art on every wall, and a beautiful white rug. Pa was talking to some friends, and one of them slipped slightly and spilled a red sauce on the beautiful white rug. And before his friend even had time to feel terrible about ruining the rug, Pa took his own plate, immediately dumped it out, and said, "I spilled too." And that shows you that is how you show someone that they're family and you love them unconditionally. And for Pa, that was second nature. In the context of safety instructions, Pa taught us George Miller's magical rule of 7, plus or minus 2, which says that people can usually remember 7 instructions, at least 5, but no more than 10. It seems fitting to adapt this principle and identify 7 ways that we can honor Pa's memory together. 1, we honor Pa's memory when we pursue learning at any cost, even $12.99. 2, we build on his legacy when we teach with unending patience. 3, we walk in his footsteps when we are passionate about our work. 4, when we brighten a conversation with humor, especially puns, Pa is laughing with us. 5, when we challenge ourselves and strive to achieve them possible, Pa believes in us. 6, when we embrace friends as family, Pa is giving us one of his extra tight hugs. And 7, each moment that we dedicate to making someone else feel special whether that is by making a handmade present or simply making time to talk, Pa lives on in us. I will really miss my 2 a.m. calls with Pa, always beginning with his signature, "How do you do?" Pa was the one person in the world whom I could talk to at any time, for any length, and about any topic. But even though he is finally resting his voice, I promise I am not done listening. I will always love you, Pa.
Would you please rise?
במעלות קדושים הטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת רפאל שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן תהי מנוחתו אנא בעל הרחמים אסתרהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו אדוני הוא נחלתו ינוח בשלום על משכבו ונאמר אמן.
O God, full of compassion, thou who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of thy presence among the holy and pure who shine as the brightness of the firmament, unto the soul of Dr. Ralph Lipsey Barnett, who has gone unto eternity. Lord of mercy, bring him under the cover of thy wings and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life, be God's possession, and may his repose be peace. Amen. Friends, we'll invite you to turn to the back of the pamphlet and you'll find the words of Mourner's Kaddish there. Every time we say the words of the Mourner's Kaddish, at once as we grieve, we are also invited to be grateful. This is the ultimate message of this prayer, that somehow our gratitude might be a balm for our pain. And in the case of Dr. Ralph Lipsey Barnett, there is so much for which to be grateful. Let's join together. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabbah ve'alma divarach erutei v'amlich malchutei b'chayechon uvyomechon v'chaye dechal beit Yisrael ba'galau v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei rabbah mevarach le'olam u'lalmei almaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei dekudsha brichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Zichrono livracha, may Ralph's memory always and only be for blessing. We say together, amen. Friends, I'll invite you to remain standing as we escort the family out of the sanctuary. You can greet them on the Goodman Terrace upon the conclusion of our service here today. Thank you so much.
Oseh shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, imru, amen. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu.